just trying to figure out, where Michael Sorkin is in relation to our times, and this is what I wrote. Perhaps it is no coincidence that the craziness of our political moment reflects a lot of talk and debate around architecture and infrastructure all of a sudden, and critical issues like energy, sanctuary cities, or the wall. And perhaps it is also not a coincidence that Michael's deep-rooted critical stances distributed over a long career of very engaging, incisive, and funny published criticism are very relevant and alive right now. Or that as the independent publisher of the new UR imprint, he's tackling all of these subjects in a series of topical and tightly focused books. And that his eponymous studio is building a lot of work internationally. Michael thrives on flux, and I'm going to try to get him to explain how we might be able to as well. So to that, why is the world going, to hell in a handbasket, but you're doing all these great things?
There's a George Orwell essay called "Why I Write." Is that on your list of things to read in the Decrypt program? In which he says, he writes for a couple of reasons in this essay, and I'm a little under the weather, so I'm not remembering precisely. But one of them is to thwart fascism, and the other is to advance democratic socialism. So I suppose that my practice is very much engaged in, and has been from the get-go, in thwarting fascism and advancing democratic socialism. I'm looking at this gray-bearded comrade, Alan Wexler, in the room, and reminded that we're both formed in another crazy period, the 1960s and early 70s, in which many of these same issues were abroad, and in which we, I think, were both obliged to formulate the idea of a practice in light of the social circumstances of architectural production. Alan has taken a kind of brilliant artistic vector. My direction has been a little more eclectic, but I think we were both motivated by the fact that conventional architectural practice at that point, for a variety of reasons, seemed impossible. And the way in which people formed their ripostes in those days was, of course, to do something else, to go live in the woods. There was a lot of kind of communalism and kind of living your politics. But we were a generation of people. We were a generation of people who could not find, in the main, a kind of comfortable situation in terms of the conventional routines of practice. And this investigation, this inquiry, this objection, this difficulty is something that has both inspired and thwarted me, in the 40 subsequent years since I graduated from architecture school. So it's a plural practice, but I hope that in each component, there's some riposte to the man. I'm not sure this is actually true. One of the sins of one's old age is that that thing which was so heartily spurned, which is working for a moneyed client and producing buildings. Want to just try that? Sort of missed it. Looks like a lot of my cohort we're doing very well along those lines. So we have been building of late under the most dire and contradiction-riddled circumstances imaginable. We have a lot of work in China. So this gives one a kind of a critical bracket on one edge of one's practice, and on the other is the kamikaze critique and talk about kamikaze activities. Publishing books in 2017 certainly qualifies.
You're raking it in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you all must buy a book, right? Or no cheese. So again, this is the latest extension of a very plural practice. I've done 20 books on my own, but wanted to have a venue not only for publishing the work of the nonprofit of Terreform, but also in solidarity to publish the work of comrades in struggle. And we've got 9 so far, and Inshallah, we'll publish one a month for the rest of Cecilia's life.
You're shaking your head, Cecilia.
She loves it.
No, that's a great overview, and just to round out with a little bit more context. I mean, how do you divide? And this is that's something you've written about, but how do you divide this practice between the nonprofit Terreform, and just explain a little bit about its mission and what you've been doing with that?
Yeah.
So
I mean, Terreform is an NGO. It's been going for about 12 years, and one of those ideas that was percolating, one struggle that one has, and you will all have when you go out there and seek employment, is trying to decide about the level of kind of institutionalization of your practice. And a nonprofit, is a nonprofit, but it is institutionalized, and there are people who expect salaries and space to maintain, a schedule to keep up with. But it's also a way of signaling that the nature of the practice is a little different from the business-like for-profit. I mean, this is strictly a term of art, since both sides of the studio hemorrhage cash at a rapid rate. Nevertheless, always wanted to be engaged, to formalize my engagement in a more serve the people kind of a practice. So we do a variety of things, and I guess the analogy that we most often present about our position at Terreform is that we act as friends of the court. So ideally, our idea is to intervene in vexed urban situations of one sort or another without a client, on behalf of raised expectations, community service, and generally, generally kind of expanding the lexicon or the repertoire of possibilities that might be enjoyed in the site. So over the years, we've done kind of a post-Sandy thing in the Rockaways. We're working is in a kind of oppositional way around the issue of a new town in Ecuador with a couple of other nonprofits. We did a counter competition to the Helsinki Guggenheim. The result being that they're not building the Guggenheim in Helsinki. We take all the credit. And we're working on a project about the south side of Chicago. And we also do much more research-based kinds of projects. So the biggest project, the one that we've been working on for 10 years, and we hope the first 2 volumes are published within the next 12 months, is a modest project to redesign New York City. And it's both a design project and a thought experiment. And the predicate or premise is that it is possible for New York City to become completely self-sufficient. So we are trying to figure out how closely coterminous the so-called ecological footprint of New York can be with its political boundaries.
I thought you pulled back from that top goal a little bit.
Well, it's a hypothesis rather than a goal. So we have discovered, for example, so we're kind of broken the thing as 7 magisterial volumes, or perhaps 8. And the first 2 are about food. We're a little behind the curve, but we've been working longer than anybody, and waste. So, for example, in the food value, we kind of test the marginal possibility of producing 21 to 2,500 nutritious calories within the boundaries of New York City. As a technical matter, it's possible, but it's ridiculous. So one thing one discovers, in there's been a big romance, there continues to be a big romance with the idea of vertical farms in the cities. And they built them in some places, Sweden, Singapore. But we discover that they are so energy intensive that the practicalities of doing this are absurd. So we look for sweet spots for other, because growing food is not simply a matter of supplying nutrition to everyone within the city. There are habits and cultures that come along with the growing preparation and consumption of and sharing of food. Good evening. So we're looking, we've tested the kind of marginal possibility and in fact indicated how you would do it if you were to do it, and where you would put the 28 nuclear power plants that would be necessary in order to power the system. We've looked at a kind of 30% solution. We've looked at a 100-mile hinterland. We've looked at turning the Erie into a kind of elementary canal. But at the end of the day, we're both testing these comprehensive possibilities, but also compiling, in effect, an encyclopedia of the technologies and morphologies that could be used in any city that wanted to take greater responsibility for its ecological footprint, and that's the real reason of for the project. It is inspired by a kind of localist politics and economics. And arises because, we are confronting the fact that, depending on the good graces of incompetent nation states, incompetent and malevolent nation states, or on the, the desires of the multinational agribusiness that supplies our food now, does not seem like a formula for increasing our autonomy and the democratic nature of our governance. So it's an experiment that's rooted in a political position, but this is what interests me about in criticizing, about speaking about, and thinking about architecture and urbanism is that relationship between equity, social organization, and form making, and it's many ways to skin that cat. The more I live, the more tolerant I am at some level, and the more intolerant I am at others. Certainly one of the possibilities that arose out of the experience of the '60s was that because of the hegemony of a certain mode of production of architecture, and a certain way of styling, if you will, buildings. A variety of alternative visual practices at that point seemed both powerful and authentic. Comrades like Alan carry on with form making as a kind of riposte to business as usual. The system, unfortunately, has proven itself brilliant at assimilating eccentricity and radical practices. So as a formal matter, I don't think, I adore Zaha, but I don't think she's had much impact on the governance of Uzbekistan or Qatar. So one is always testing these margins. The city, of course, is interesting because how long has this program been going? So it was sort of, it's a little bit after the high water mark of the kind of analytical mode that tended to think that that all of social life was somehow embedded in the architectural object. Believing as I do, both in the, to coin a phrase, the relative autonomy of art, and in the kind of limitations of building practice. I've always been interested in the city because there are certain things that cannot, in fact, be read in the configuration of a single room. Plenty that can. But there was a kind of critical and theoretical period in which architecture was overloaded with significance. And I didn't exactly buy into that fundamentally narcissistic relationship to the architectural object. So, of course, I've always been interested in the city. In fact, we were just fingering the latest edition of the Lewis Mumford of the City and History, and that was very formative for me. In fact, my late mother, God bless her, was a subscriber to the New Yorker from maybe 1928. To the day she died, and so Alzheimer's inhibited her capacity to read the New Yorker. She never threw a New Yorker away, and the thousands that I was obliged to lug to the Martha Washington Branch Library after her death was impressive. But she read them systematically, and when she would finish one, she would draw a score, a line through the, signifying that it had been consumed. At any rate, she Lewis Mumford used to write the Skylines column in the New Yorker. She loved and was very drawn to Mumford. Ah, Dolly. I can't find a way in. Huh? But I made it. Come here.
There's a seat here. There's a seat right here. Come to the center. Right here.
Yeah. You could, if you waited a half an hour, you could have gone straight to the cheese. Anyway, so when The City and History was published in 1963, she gave it to me for a birthday present. An interesting year, same year that Death and Life was published, same year also that Silent Spring was published. Oh, really? And that Betty Friedan. Oh God.
Right. You call it the heroic age of those books.
It was.
They were really coming fast.
Well, but somehow this was a kind of pivot. But that was the book I was given, and I wonder if she'd given me one of the others, how life would have been different. But I gulped that book down, and of course, young boy with architectural ambitions, I was drawn to the plates. And totally bought into the kind of modernist ideology that Mumford was selling at the end of the day, thought the whole thing kind of culminated in pictures of Vällingby. Do you all know Vällingby, which was a Swedish new town with those street lamps that do this with a spherical bulb at the end, and I thought this was just the cat's pajamas, and that sort of set me on my architectural course. I mean, many years later, I visited Vällingby and realized that I had been seduced by a photograph that misrepresented the actual facts on the ground. But that was very much present in my formation. I remember the architectural history sequence that I was taught when I got to architecture by Edward Seckler, who was a wonderful kind of Viennese architectural historian, great guy, politically correct. But he had a kind of teleology, and I remember, this was the course, from Çatalhöyük to the Villa Savoy, and somewhere in the third week we were looking at Hatshepsut's temple, and it's being presented as a kind of anticipation of Mies. And I kind of bought into that set of formal ideas, but I also bought into something about the way in which modernism attached its ideology to a series of forms, as if they were the one and only translation of the mathematical equality of the socialist subject. This was a wrong turn, and again, much of what was happening in the 60s sought to decouple the formal and the social in terms of the generation of that very particular relation, and look to attach the social to other forms, and to recognize that the social was not produced by architecture, but that the process was the other way around, and that architecture was produced by different kinds of social constructions. So the outrageous architecture of the time was making that point, and to a lesser degree, the kind of egregious recuperation of classicism that was very much abroad, sort of just beginning when we were in school, but efflorescing a little later. Was also part of a kind of meaningful riposte to this idea of a singularity in the relationship, even if it was conveying its own range of sinister and regressive meanings, and was another anecdote.
Okay. Let's
I'm
go.
meant to be telling the story.
Now let's go.
Yeah,
I want to go back to Steady State New York real quick.
Okay.
Which is
Then I'll tell
the big of.
my good Aldo Van Eyck story.
Oh, I was going to bring that up. All right, yeah. Well, we'll see. Okay, so just for the benefit of everyone here, Steady State New York is that big project where you're going to.
New York City Steady State. Yeah.
Okay. You're going to look at all aspects of self-sustainability within New York. What are the other volumes that are going to come out? Food waste.
You'll see. So there's food waste, and there's one about air, water, and climate. There's one about mobility. There's one about construction. There's one about maybe there's one about manufacturing. There's probably a kind of greatest hits volume of steady state and localist economists, and we'll see.
And do any of these proposals that start out in Terreform manifest later through the studio? And I mean, I know you have to divide business and structural, but like what?
Intellectually, there's no division, and the good designers are all mainly on the studio side. So we press them into service. The only thing is that they can't be paid out of the Terreform pot, so they are. I oblige them to volunteer, which they grumble about, but yeah. So of course, yeah. No. Conceptually speaking, there's no membrane. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I mean that's what steady state is really about: is the nature of the membrane around the city and the degree to which it is permeable. It's all sounding very much like Trump economics, this kind of protectionism. I don't think it has the same point of origin as the kind of Trumpian ideas about protectionism. We're very interested in, Jane Jacobs.
And I think your model includes that it will get hotter.
I expect it will get hotter. Right. The waters will rise. Right. I mean, just parenthetically, all the kind of forms and technologies in the book are can be anticipated. Nothing is premised on anti-gravity paint or, other exotic nuclear fusion, other exotic and perhaps undeliverable technologies. So, again. I think that one of the things that's happened in the whole movement towards sustainability is that as it becomes beloved of the corporate world, Tesla bigger than Ford, it gets mystified in terms of the need to solve problems with a maximum level of technology. And certainly one thing that we preach and I hector my students is that one seeks the lowest energy, the least complicated solution. So it really is about insulation, ventilation, insulation, rather than these elaborate systems of mechanicals. And if there were daylight, it would be before the lecture, right? So, what was the question?
Yeah, we're moving on. Yeah. I think I had noticed. I mean, you're talking about the political context of when you started and what was interesting to you, and my hypothesis is that there's a lot of interest in my generation of these movements and these operations. X, let's say X. Let's say X. I'm not sure. We still don't know what it means. But the groups like Ant Farm or the Italian Radicals or the Whole Earth Catalog, I feel like there's a lot of resurgent interest in these things, and it's not out of a blithe sort of utopianism. But what do you think that's about?
Well, maybe you have to tell me. I'm not entirely hostile to blithe utopianism myself, but I mean. Again, if it's recuperated as merely a kind of stylistic effusion, too bad. Then I think the point is missed. If it's recuperated as a kind of axis of rebellion, more power to you. But tell me. Yeah, I was interested to see the work by this Iranian artist who couldn't get a visa for which was a kind of dark ant farm, burnt out Car Hulk ranch in the suburbs of Tehran. You see images of that piece. So I wonder about the filiation, the descent of Cadillac Ranch into the killing fields on the Iraqi border. If that's.
You wanted to talk, you had an anecdote about Aldo van Eyck.
Yeah, it's illustrating a point of, 10 minutes ago. But there was a moment. I was teaching at Penn one semester, and so was Aldo, and I walked in, took the train, walked into school one day, and this was at the kind of low ebb or high water mark, depending on your point of view, of the most fonus balonus kind of classicizing pomo. And students were, making, you had crow quill pens and dipping them in ink and doing washes and drawing the orders. And they're at Penn, like many other places, and I walked in, and Aldo van Eyck there was a show of this work, which Aldo van Eyck was ripping off the wall and stomping on. And people were aghast, because this was, an affront to freedom of expression, and, how can you destroy this pleasant student work? And then Dean came out, and, saying, Aldo, how can you do this? What's going on here? What's your motive? And he says, democracy means no freedom for fascism. I take that point.
Mm-hmm. So that can be a blurry boundary.
Yeah, fascism is fascinating. We had our mid-review yesterday, and I was out for drinks with the guest critics, including a German woman who didn't know about Gertie Trost, who I learned something about over the summer. Does everybody know Gertie Trost, who was the wife of Ludwig Trost, who did the House of German Art in Munich? Kind of one of the great instances of Nazi architecture. He died somewhat before the war, and she became, in effect, the domesticator of Hitler, and was responsible for the interior design of the Berghof, and for kind of reinventing him in the years before the war. Much published in Life magazine. Very sympathetic. Lederhosen and hat and a dog and all this kind of stuff. Reinventing him as a kind of country squire. And if you know about her, in virtually every scene in which large numbers of Nazis are assembled, there are 20 guys in their ridiculous uniforms and one woman in a white dress. So keep your eyes peeled. When I can't sleep, I wake up in the middle of the night, and if I've watched Rachel Maddow already 4 times, I switch to the Hitler channel, which I did last night. Part 2, Rise of the Nazis, and there she was. Gertie Trost, who's in this very interesting kind of condominium with Leni Riefenstahl. So Leni kind of dealt with the crowd scenes, and Gertie dealt with the interiors, with the kind of domestic scenes. And one of you should write a screenplay. I think about this. Gertie, well, like Leni, I mean, they both lived to their 90s, I think. Unreconstructed, unapologetic, but an interesting character.
So you had said, and I read this, and it's maybe the last book of criticism. I think that anecdote is in the introduction, and you had said, Van Eyck really thought that this expression was like architectural hate speech.
Yeah,
I think if such a thing can exist.
Yeah, he probably did. Yeah, I got called. There's this. What's his name? Trump has apparently been elected president, which means that So I've been writing nasty pieces about Trump since 1960, whatever, and so I get the occasional phone call to be interviewed about Trump, and I got one last week, and kept can you come and be filmed in front of Trump Tower? I said, no, that's too far uptown, but I let me propose Plan B, which is my studio is 2 blocks from the Trump Soho Hotel. Why don't you come down here, and we can film in the public space, that he traded for his zoning bonus out back, and so they were first alarmed. So, he couldn't do that. I mean, they wouldn't permit it. I said, it's a fucking public space, you know, it's ours. We can film there. And I said, and what could be better for an interview about Trump than if the goons emerge from the hotel and try to shut us down? You know, unfortunately it rained, but, you know, in the course of anticipating this interview, and like other people who've called me up to speak about Trump, they want to ask me what the quality of the architect, is he a good architectural patron, you know? Are they good buildings, you know? Is Trump Tower a good building? Is, you know, the one in Chicago, is that a good building? You know, it's a question that one demurs, one doesn't want to answer this question. I mean, in fact, you know, his buildings are, you know, they're the kind of upper end of mediocre. He hires, you know, the low end of the A, the high end of the B list of corporate designers. But it's so entirely beside the point. You know, the invention in the Trump Hotel, of course, was this real estate formula. You know, the residential hotel, by which he beat the system of a neighborhood that was not zoned for transient hotels, and by which he eked out, as he does with his every building, you know, incredible bonuses in order to create a building 3 times higher and 10 times uglier than anything around. You know, it's the question of the labor, you know, these Polish slaves who built the Trump Tower, or the black people who, you know, what was the letter they wrote on the forums, you know, N, I think, you know, indicating that these people would not be rented apartments, or his dispatch to Cincinnati. Where was the project that his father bought early on, where he was meant to clean it up, meaning, you know, get the African Americans out and the white people in. So, you know, we should not let ourselves be distracted by a discussion of the finer points. You know, even the egregious finer points. You know, in Chicago.
What about him starting out by tearing down Obama Teller in the middle of the night? Yeah,
well, he tore. I mean, sure. Yeah, it's a crime, and we would have liked the yes. But I mean, the people who tore it down were slave laborers who were being unpaid and unfed and sleeping in the building. Yeah, no, he did. He certainly has committed many criminal acts, but you know, the height of his criminality cannot be ascribed to the fact that the Trump sign on the Chicago Trump Tower is too big, which they, you know, what's the dopey critic out there called? Blair Kamen is kind of whinging on about the, you know, the sign is too big.
You're taking Trump's side on that one now. You're taking Trump's side on Blair Kamen now.
I don't like the sign, but, you know, as everybody knows, you know, his main operational method is distraction. So, you know, one sees the sign somehow but misses the 90 stories behind it. You know, one reads the tweet about you know, Obama bugging him, and misses the fact that he's just eviscerated every environmental regulation, is arresting you know, the undocumented by the thousands, you know, is ripping off the system for the greater glory of his companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're in a you know, particularly those of us who are writing about the environment and about architecture, we're in a kind of perplexing situation. So you have to ask yourself, as we asked about practicing architecture in, you know, 1970, is this simply leveraging the success of the system? So the same question has to be asked about if you write about the kind of expressive character of the Trump Tower, are you leveraging the success and circumscribing the capacity to criticize the system for the truly egregious things that it does? I mean, at the end of the day, what is it? It's a building, right, for rich people. I've seen that before somewhere.
So you've had experience working in.
But it keeps coming back again and again. So, you know, I've written a few times about. I'm about to write a piece called something like, you know, take backsies. You know, thinking about all the things that maybe I got wrong. So, you know, one of the whipping buildings of the last year has been the Herzog and Demeron building on Leonard Street. Well, you know that building. Have they got the Anish Kapoor door installed? Which, I see out my bedroom window, and it's like 1/3 of the sky is now gone, and I hate that thing. And so because I hate it for its effects, I deride it for its form. And which brings you on a kind of delicate question about, I think this speaks to the way we understand architecture. Can you write the sentence that this building would be very good someplace else? I mean, it's to decontextualize a work in architecture like that, which means that you are kind of repairing to a kind of kunstwissenschaftliches routine, critical routine. This is a moment for self-consciousness. I don't have a definitive answer for you, but the question comes up because I have a friend who's an architectural photographer who took some pictures of that building, which looked fantastic. I was, well, it looks fantastic from Duane Street or wherever it was he was photographing, but in the context of the fact that there are 20 buildings like that suddenly appearing, or that it begs the question of
come down to downtown Brooklyn.
Yeah, exactly. Or that should your view be grandfathered? Do you have a right to the sky? I mean, that's a real question, given the fact that the origin of the kind of zoning legislation in New York City was a kind of consensus about exactly the fact that was a right, light and air, and the nature of the subtraction is something that I think we have to. We just moved the studio. We were on the 12th floor. We moved to the 15th, and as a result of moving up, we cleared a 12-story building next door, which suddenly opened up this panoramic view to Midtown. And I looked out my window. I was flabbergasted by all the buildings that I did not realize existed. Suddenly this third growth, of sprouting up. Nobody asked my permission for this, but the city is being reconfigured. In its formal character. Without our consent, really. I don't know. I have no answers, but I certainly got plenty of questions.
So from practice here to practice in China, which you've done, let's say, in various ways, dozens of projects over decades.
Yeah.
And you told me that maybe 5% of these actually get built. And what have you learned about, working in this context, right? And working at that kind of success rate, and the more you do so, do your odds of getting something over the finish line improve?
Well, it's I have to go and be on a dissertation defense tomorrow at the Graduate Center, and it's a dissertation by somebody who's written a kind of ethnographic study of a new development, beyond the 8th Ring Road in Beijing, so he spends some time living with construction workers, he spends some time living in the finished project, and he spends some time interviewing the kind of chain of development, including the architects. And what he discloses in terms of the relationship of the architects to the project is they don't give a shit. They just take orders and crank it out. So that is China. It's a kind of environment in which people don't give a shit, which can cut both ways. On the one hand, because they don't really care, that opens up a kind of creative margin that can be exploited. Okay, fine. We just want to, spend. We want cash flow so we can take bribes. So that opens up a margin. On the other hand, because the kind of the primary activity, particularly for a little practice like mine, obliged to affiliate with some mega design institute in China, is to, the game is to see how long you can maintain any control over the project. Our experience is, not long enough. So, on the other hand, the disrespect that not giving a shit engenders is also highly problematic because they hire some horrible landscape architecture. You build the building, you get kind of 80% of what you want, and then some moron comes and screws it up with incompatible forms.
Well, maybe.
But you can't play the game unless you have some tenacity and some principle as an artist, because at the end of the day, that's not the whole story, but it's a part of the story. That architecture isn't in fact interesting if it doesn't have that supplement or component of artistic invention. I mean, not interesting for me.
Has anyone ever referred you from one unsuccessful project to another over there?
Oh.
Like, how do you cultivate
well,
this?
Define success. Yeah, sure. I mean, we have a kind of, we have two legs up. One of them is we have sort of uncanny ability to win competitions. I don't know why that is, and we charge Chinese rates. So which means we keep getting projects which keep not getting built. We're hoping that Alan is going to publish a book which is a kind of self-criticism about practicing in China. So we won a competition for a university expansion in Tangshan, and it was a good enough project. Not our most avant-garde work, but pretty good project. Urbanistically, quite good. And it seemed like it was going forward, and we got a phone call from one of the authorities who said, you won the competition, and this is a good project, but in fact, it's too good. Because this is a government project, and if they see that we are building projects that are too good, there is going to be trouble. And I am going to email you some images of buildings that are less good. And if you could redesign your project to increase the mediocrity quotient, we might be able to talk further. And we didn't do this.
How did those other buildings look that he emailed you?
I have no idea. This whole intellectual property concept is not really on in China. So we periodically do a big project. We've designed a city of 400,000. So we periodically check Google Earth to see whether it's there. It's fun,
I have a question about not how you integrate all of the different activities that you're engaged with, like designing, teaching, criticism, publishing, which you've said is all your practice. But maybe more about the scale. I mean, just working at the mega scales. How does that jibe with the other thing that you do so well, that you're really known for, which is just the intimacy of this sort of shoe leather urbanism and the walk? And does toggling between scales ever disorient you?
No. I mean, but one has to appreciate that if you're designing a city of 400,000 in a month, that what you're producing is a kind of a fiction. That there is some organizational core. There are some principles that can be inscribed in a month. One thinks, I don't think it's illegitimate. Again, forbidden subjects of the 1960s was the master plan, thinking about cities in terms of the all at once, and as a conceptual operation, as a mode of thought, I've never found thinking both at the very large scale and the very small scale necessarily incompatible, as long as there is a dialogic relationship to them, and you have the opportunity to produce the one or the other in terms of its reciprocal scale, its reciprocating scale. So yes, and leave us not forget that the planet is urbanizing at the rate of 1.5 million people a week. And simply the Beijing strategy, which is to add another ring road, the kind of exponential expansion of megacities, which 50% of which is in slums, that's not on. So I feel fairly comfortable as an advocate for the idea of the new town being, back to Vallingby, the new town being part of the solution to what is genuinely a crisis.
Is there a better understanding of just like all the scales of transportation, including, and ideas that seem like really accessible and normal to us, like walkability? I mean, when you design these master plans, how much is this integral?
I mean, sure. I mean, all of that is integral, and in fact, one of the things about China is that they're kind of talking the talk, and they expect you to talk the talk. Walking the walk is another matter. But it's I haven't even been there, but it's a fascinating Janus, and they build more subway stations in an hour in China than New York City has built in the last 50 years. So on the one hand, they're getting some of it. On the other hand, everybody wants a Buick. They're still dining out on the advice they got from their Soviet brothers and sisters in 1958 about the superblock.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, even at the height of the kind of the Maoist excrescence, one of the kind of organizing principles of Chinese urbanism is the so-called danwei, or production unit. Which was something very utopian. One of the things we preach in Steady State and in the design work we do is the idea that a neighborhood or a district or a town has to be thought of in terms of a kind of harmonization of its social and metabolic functions. And a danwei, production unit, the idea was, there was, in its kind of classic incarnation, there was a steel mill and workers' housing and a store and 6 schools, all this kind of stuff. It was a little Auschwitz-like in terms of being a kind of self-sufficient community. On the other hand, Tsinghua, the Harvard of China, is also a danwei. And it's bowery and pleasant and truly communal, and has a hospital and plenty of restaurants and nice buildings. And, there's a component of this kind of ideologically driven construct that's very sweet. Even if it can be embodied both in a kind of dystopian, authoritarian fashion, as well as in a more democratic, a more benign, a more socially constructive format.
Do they still design in this way? I mean, isn't the presence of like 20 times more cars just kind of blowing that unit apart?
Well, cars, I mean, but there's the so-called the state-owned enterprises are still such a huge component, of the economic picture in China, that they sort of beg the question about the people who. Yes, I mean, it's possible that they will devolve into these, and indeed in this dissertation, it's very, very much about, same situation here, you know that phrase, drive till you qualify, which is a description of looking for an affordable mortgage. You drive further and further out to the periphery of the city until you qualify for a mortgage. So you get the house at a rate you can afford at the cost of an hour and a half commuting each way. Same thing is happening in China, where New York is an interesting place given the kind of staggering high percentage of renters. I read this statistic, and it's in some ways fictitious, but 95% of the population of China are owners. Renting is very rare. There's this huge floating population of people who don't have the right pass, who are doing all the construction work and taking all the low-paying jobs, but in the kind of statistical methodology, they are considered to be homeowners because they are, technically peasants who have property in their home villages. So, so this idea of ownership is, fetishized in China. People own many apartments, and because there's no place else to sink your money, it's the only investment considered to be marginally safe. So, interesting situation. Interesting situation. Yeah, but it more and more comes with the Buick.
What's the equivalent of the Buick over there?
The
Really?
Buick.
Right? Really?
Yeah. No, the streets are filled with Buicks. I don't build them over there.
I think I just wanted to get one more topic, since I wanted to convey the sense that everything you do, whether it is your research or your design or your writing or your publishing, is part of an overall critical practice. And without kind of like trotting out the what's the state of criticism today kind of thing, like what do you think is important for people writing criticism today? And that could be something as, it may not be the stance, which is something that we all were like very inculcated with in design, research, and writing. But, what else? What do you look for, and what can you do without?
Well, maybe you should answer this question. I mean, I love a fancy prose style for sure. But we were having a conversation the other day, about this Luddite practice, and I have to admit I am somebody who does not assimilate information from digital media, but I can see lunch with Kimmelman, and he tells you about these amazing things the Times is apparently doing, in which there is a kind of hybrid medium, in which there are words and fly-throughs and plans are presented, and in theory that sounds promising, and certainly one remembers conversations going back many years about words being a kind of inadequate descriptor of, in film is, because architecture has to be consumed in time and space, maybe the film is the way in which we're, I don't know. I don't happen to make films, but I certainly think that one of the issues for me is a defense of writing, which seems to yet be the most concise, succinct, expressive, and thought-provoking medium for communication. I don't know whether you think otherwise. I see you all have desks over there. I don't know whether you're producing digital stuff or actually stringing sentences together.
All kinds of things.
Yeah.
Including podcasts and video.
There is some kind of, thank God, Cecilia is there and people of her generation, because, they're, I don't even know the words, I don't think they're tweeting or social media, but again, I just did another essay collection. I'm finishing the introduction, and it's sort of the first bit is there's a kind of Trump riff, and then there's a kind of riff about, people who kind of Leb and Zaha, big losses, and then I'm trying to write the last bit, which is sort of about being in the elevator of my building and being the only person who isn't connected, and I don't know what that means, but it's for you to figure it out.
Okay.
This may kill that.
It might be a good time to open it up for a few questions, please.
And then the cheese.
WNYC announced that several faculty members who are in the either design or architecture positions at Parsons and the New School have submitted proposals for helping Trump build his wall on the grounds that these are going to be ecologically or somehow culturally significant.
Fire them, but that that bromide, that kind of self-persuasion, that goes back many moons, and this profession that if I didn't do it, somebody worse would, as your excuse for building the prison or the supermax or the the stadium in the Qatar. Yeah, how disgusting, and this is the new school, the home of refugees from fascism. Yeah, again, I don't. So their defense apparently is that it will be an environmental disaster among other things. So to modulate that is that a good reason? I don't. There's been lots of kind of communication flying back and forth among organizations and architects about how to confront this. Because it's many billions of dollars. It's pharaonic in scale. Most of, either the riposte is a kind of sincere rejection of having anything to do with it, or, I don't know whether this is better or worse, or a kind of, let's get together and produce a kind of compendium of the most ironical responses we can to this, which also is, in a way self-defeating, unless it's really funny, of course. But we shall see. You got their names? Let's call them out.
They didn't put their names on the
Shame.
the institutions they were associated with.
Well, it's right down the street, kids. Go and trash the studio. But yeah, but this question comes up because I'm noticing in City College that there are some people who are designing prisons. There's a studio about prisons, and I signed that petition 100 years ago that I would never participate in the design of a prison, but this is a very kind of controversial. You wouldn't think it would be controversial professional subject. So there's a good organization called ADPSR, Architects, Designers, and Planners for Social Responsibility, which has been around for a while, and they're very big on petitioning and against the design of some of these places, and they've had a drive for the last few years, not to persuade architects to refuse to design jails and prisons, but simply to refuse to design execution chambers and solitary confinement cells. The New York AIA, in its wisdom, refused to endorse this position. San Francisco and Portland, Oregon did. So, we have a long way to go in terms of, the mainstream of the profession resisting even the most egregious temptations. It's the argument that, well, it's legal, I mean, the Nazis also made sure of the kind of legality of what they were doing successively. Race laws and all that.
Hi. I have a question about your latest book, the Helsinki Design Competition.
Yeah.
So you describe it as a blueprint for successful resistance since the Guggenheim proposal was rejected in 2016. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on how that book kind of contributed to the decision. I was following the competition closely, and from my understanding, I know that it was, there were a lot of complexities surrounding the different financial structures and Helsinki's priorities for the South Harbor. For example, I know that the city was considering other capital projects like a library or a children's hospital or a biomedical center. So I guess, when we use words like resistance, I think we have to be really responsible. And so I guess, I just want to make sure that when you make that claim that it's actually stacking up to kind of the thinking and thoughtfulness around what the city council had elected to do. I think it's a pretty bold claim that you're making, so I just kind of wanted you to elaborate.
Of course, the book itself, which was published after the result, thanks to our sluggish production pace, was not in fact responsible. But this was a series of events organized by three groups. One of them Terreform, one of them the global ultra luxury faction, which has been working on labor practices in Abu Dhabi, particularly focused on the NYU campus, the Guggenheim, and the appalling labor conditions there, and an arts organization in Helsinki called Checkpoint Helsinki. And the basic argument was, how does a relatively advanced welfare state deploy its money on the arts? And in fact, artists in Helsinki and in Finland are extremely dependent on government provision, both in terms of direct funding, but also in terms of a variety of kind of instrumentalities of social welfare, including medical care and housing and education, in order to have their practices in this small country and relative hothouse. So I think that the issues that we raised, which were all focused on the propriety of spending a fairly substantial sum of public funds on this essentially privatized enterprise, whether that was the most relevant or desirable disposition of cultural energy in this advanced democracy. We concluded not. There's some pretty good essays in the book that argue the case from various perspectives. The events that we held in the run-up to actually publishing the book, having the competition, having conferences, meeting with the press, the arts organizations got together in consortia in order to oppose this thing. One of the people who was kind of seduced us into undertaking this project was in fact a member of the Helsinki City Council. So we simply wanted to leverage a larger role in the conversation, which I think we successfully did. Of course, this thing is, interestingly, you'll look at the proposals, some of them are, they fall into a few categories. Some of them are very serious proposals about a kind of distributed system of arts funding, via different kinds of institutions and artifacts around the city. Some of them are more comprehensive proposals for looking at the South Harbor, and a third of them are hilarious, kind of ironic ripostes to the idea of the object building and the transposability of the vaunted Bilbao effect to a city that's already pretty fantastic.
Is it the youth of film as a medium and other mediums in comparison to the written word, why you feel that way, or why you feel like, because written word is more developed as a medium, I'm just wondering if that's why you feel like it's the most succinct and superior medium.
I'm speaking narrowly about criticism of the environment. And I certainly, one of the things, this famous, I said this will kill that. This is this famous Victor Hugo line about, the printing press killing architecture because it's so much more succinct and economical. We're in for a diversity of media expressions. When I think about film, certainly what I think about is the threshold that we're at now in the kind of digital environment, where the time, labor, and expense required to actually produce a film is now potentially in the hands of an individual, which I think is potentially transformative. I'm not ruling out the succinct expression of any other medium. I guess I'm arguing that I've been arguing tonight that all the media in which I work I regard as susceptible to assimilating a critical component. So when one designs a city, one is designing with certain principles, which means by extension that one is designing in opposition to another set of principles. So I think that that many media can be infused with a kind of critical positioning, but I think that the written word is under strain. It's stressed. Books are disappearing. Libraries are in trouble. Newspapers are dying. And I'm not sure that this is salubrious. My wife is a film theorist. So came up through the way in which continental theory was first appeared in the English-speaking world in cinema studies departments, and she now teaches in a program that used to be called semiotics, but it's now called modern culture and media, and she's kind of reports to me that people are writing their PhDs about Twitter, and she feels totally kind of left out, like even film is being in its kind of classic incarnation left behind by this incredible profusion of new media. One abandons Eisenstein, and Kuleshov and Fellini with some reluctance. So I don't know. What's your practice?
I'm a planner, but I hope to take my career in a more interdisciplinary way, so topic defining planning with filmmaking and journalism.
Yeah. No, I have to say, I've sort of been involved with some films that purport to be critical / analytical. And although they're often endearing moments where endearing immersive moments where you get into the space, I find that the kind of editing conventions, the scenographic conventions can be more distracting, that the kind of long arc of argument is often lost in films about architecture in particular. I can't think of any that I think are really, the Lucan one was pretty good. But, certainly at the level of the appreciation of the quality of some of those spaces, but I'm much more so at the level of gossip. So, I don't know. Let 1,000 flowers blossom. This one is about public space in the Arab world post-Tahrir Square. This one is our bestseller. This one is about zoning in New York City as a strategy of racial exclusion. This one is a kind of tribute to the great Marshall Berman. We saw the slide up there. I hope you have the rights to that photograph, taken by a student. This one is about the kind of urbanism and the social displacement effects leading up to the Rio Olympics. This is the Helsinki one. This is about post-Sandy retrofit strategies for New York City. We can't figure out what this one is about, but it's fantastic. This one is a speculation about the way in which the planet might be transformed if the most dire effects of climate change take place in the year 2100. And this is a Terreform project, which is a kind of response to the Columbia expansion. It's this is a plan for Upper Manhattan that assumes that the university has benign and generous motives. A leap of faith.
Nice. Thank you.
Bye.
Can I ask the last question? I think it can be pretty quick. So last week we had Jeremy Scahill here, who is an investigative journalist, and he has a site called The Intercept, and he was one of the journalists who first published the Edward Snowden documents, and he was talking about the state of investigative journalism today, and specifically journalists operating in Washington, and how most of them he feels are useless as journalists because they become enamored with being close to power and hanging out with those in power, and having water gun fights in Joe Biden's backyard and things like that. So, he was saying, naming some names of people he thought were not great. But I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that with regard to writing criticism or being in a place where you can creditably write criticism, and you don't have to. You've already named a name or two tonight, but I was wondering if you could say who you think is doing it right from maybe a younger generation, who you think is doing it right, and also what for our students and alums, what do you have to kind of keep in mind and maintain in order to take on that role?
Yeah, well, you gotta be fearless, and you gotta be unafraid to bite. Which is not the case of many critics. Lots of critics are seduced by the glamour of architecture and architects in particular. And I'm not in fact going to name names, but a recent book. Look at the credits. Who is thanked? The architects are shown around their buildings. I'm remembering years ago a party that 100-year-old now I.M. Pei threw for Ada Louise. There was apparently chopped liver effigy of Ada Louise, greeting the guests, squirting chocolate with them. This kind of the reciprocity of these seductions is something that one has to be very wary of, and it's very common. So I think I'm here. Well, let's break some news. I think I'm just about done with The Nation, because it's so. One, because it's really badly written. Two, because the front of the book is always the same. But three, I was sort of looking at the back of the book and wondering about a kind of cultural strategy on the part of the left, in which the kind of critical operation is about the same work that the bourgeois media cover. So a kind of left perspective on Avatar, as opposed to a ticket. Do we not have our the other positive? So I like Michael Keaton, but you can see that the kind of deal he's worked out is, and there's some tension there, obviously, with the higher ups. Is I'll write a socially responsible piece, and then I'll write a kind of suck-up piece. It's just this kind of oscillation between these two modes of appreciation. It's very difficult given the way in which criticism is produced. So, if I take heart in this kind of profusion of digital media sites which are devoted to criticism, it's because I think that they offer the possibility of evading the kind of market-based constraint that the traditional media impose on you, including the newspapers, and what do we have, one architectural magazine in this country at this point, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, it's not enough to be fearless, in the face of the familiar. You must stake out a territory where you think the real issue is actually in here. It may have nothing to do with nice buildings. Cheese.
Anyone want to give this man some column space? Thank you.